Mark lived a quiet life now. After serving 10 long years in the Terran army, he returned to his home colony on the edge of human space. His hands still carried the steady calm of a soldier, but his heart longed for peace. Days were simple. He worked repairing small machines for neighbors and spent evenings watching ships lift off from the dusty port. Nothing ever happened on this small colony world, and Mark liked it that way. One morning, a courier drone arrived at his door. It carried a metal case sealed with old codes. The markings were foreign, almost ceremonial, as if this was no ordinary delivery. The drone spoke in a flat voice. Inheritance transfer for Mark. Confirm identity. After scanning his ID chip, the drone left without another word. Mark studied the case. His name was engraved in smooth letters on the surface. The sender's name made him pause. Captain Rowan, a distant cousin he had met only once as a boy. Rowan had been an explorer, always chasing rumors of strange worlds and rare creatures. Mark thought he had died years ago. Why would Rowan send him something now? The case hissed open. Inside was not money, not weapons, not documents. Inside lay a living creature. It was a cub, no larger than a house cat, with gold-striped fur and a sleek tail that curled around its body. Its breathing was shallow, and its eyes were half-closed. Even so, Mark felt a strange weight in the air. This was not a normal animal. Its small head lifted, and it locked its bright amber eyes on him. For a moment, Mark forgot to breathe. The cub looked at him not with fear, but with something close to recognition. Alongside the cub was a data chip. The message inside was short. Mark, if you are reading this, I'm gone. This creature is an Empress predator cub. It must live. Others will come for it. Trust no one. Mark had heard of Empress predators. Hunters spoke of them in hushed voices. They were apex creatures from deep space jungles, said to be faster and stronger than anything humans had ever encountered. No one had seen one alive for decades. The stories claimed they were nearly extinct. The cub let out a faint sound, something between a growl and a whimper. Mark knelt down. Its fur felt hot to the touch. He ran a quick scan using his hand tool. The display shocked him. The cub's body was full of tiny signals, millions of microscopic shapes moving inside it. Parasites spreading through its blood, its muscles, even its brain. Any normal creature would have been dead already, but this cub was still alive. Mark carried it inside and placed it in a warm container. He fed it drops of water, careful and slow. As the cub drank, it kept staring at him, never looking away. There was intelligence in those amber eyes. That evening, a stranger came to his door. The man wore a dark travel coat and spoke politely. I heard you received a delivery today. He said, a rare animal. I represent a buyer who will pay well to take it off your hands. He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. Mark had spent enough years in uniform to read danger. The man was no simple trader. Not for sale, Mark said firmly. The stranger did not argue. He simply nodded and walked away. But Mark knew he would be back. By nightfall, Mark had locked every door and checked every window. He watched the cub sleep. Its breathing grew stronger, and now and then its tail twitched as if it dreamed. The scanner showed the parasites multiplying even faster, yet the cub did not weaken. Instead, its heartbeat grew steady, powerful. Mark spoke softly to it. What are you, little one? The cub opened its eyes again. For just a moment, Mark thought he saw something impossible. A flicker of light deep inside those amber eyes, as if it understood him. Later that night, Mark was woken by a faint alarm from his perimeter sensors. Someone was moving outside. He grabbed his old service rifle, kept more for memory than for use. Through the window, he saw shadows near his door. Whoever they were careful, trained. They were not here to talk. Before Mark could move, the cub stood on shaky legs inside its container. It let out a low rumble. The lights in his small house flickered as if something disturbed the circuits. Mark felt a sudden pulse of static in the air. Then the shadows outside backed away. He did not hear footsteps, but his sensors showed them retreating fast. When dawn came, Mark checked the door. No damage. No intruders. but in the dust outside were fresh boot prints, 3 sets. Whoever they were, they had come close, then left in a hurry. The cub lay curled up again, breathing calmly, as if nothing had happened. Mark knew then that his life had changed. This was no ordinary inheritance. If strangers wanted the cub this badly, there was a reason. He packed a small bag, loaded supplies, and prepared his old ship for launch. Staying here would only put others in danger. Before leaving, he looked down at the creature again. "Guess it's just you and me now," he said quietly. The cub blinked slowly, as if answering. Mark decided to call it Nova, because even in sickness it burned with strange energy. As his ship rose from the colony port, Mark could not shake one thought. Whatever these parasites were doing inside Nova, they were not killing it, they were changing it, and if someone powerful wanted Nova stopped, that meant humanity might be facing something far greater than just a sick animal. Mark guided his old ship away from the colony and set a course into open trade lanes. The vessel was a worn freighter named Iron Wind, not fast but reliable. He kept Nova in a small cabin where the temperature and oxygen were carefully adjusted. The cub slept most of the time, but its breathing had grown stronger, and its golden fur gleamed faintly under the light. Mark kept scanning Nova with his portable device. The readings were strange. Millions of parasites swam through the cub's body, yet instead of weakening, Nova was gaining strength. Its heartbeat was louder, more steady. Even the bones showed changes, as if they were becoming denser. Mark did not like mysteries, but this one was alive and staring back at him with amber eyes. He needed answers. A friend of his, an engineer named Paul, worked at an outpost on the edge of Terran space. Paul had good medical scanners, the kind used for deep tissue scans. If anyone could figure out what was happening inside Nova, it was him. Days into the journey, Mark noticed something else. Nova was no longer acting like a weak animal. When Mark changed course to avoid a debris field, the cub let out a short growl seconds before the navigation system detected the hazard. Later, as Mark prepared to land on a refueling station, Nova woke suddenly and paced in its container. Moments later, a warning appeared on the console. An unknown vessel had entered the area, running dark with no ID signal. The timing was too perfect to be chance. Mark trusted his instincts. He took off without refueling and pushed the engines harder than they liked. Hours later, far behind him, the station reported a security alert. Armed men had asked questions about a traveler carrying a live specimen. By the time Mark reached Paul's outpost, he was tired but alert. The small research station floated above a rocky moon, quiet and empty except for a few workers. Paul welcomed Mark with a wide grin. "I thought you retired to stay out of trouble," Paul said. "Now you show up with something in a box and a face that says someone's after you." Mark showed him Nova. The cub opened its eyes and sniffed the air, watching Paul carefully. "This is no ordinary pet," Paul said at once. "Where did you get it?" "Long story," Mark said. "I just need a scan. Something's inside it. Millions of something." Paul ran his equipment over the cub. The results made him whistle. "These are not natural parasites. They are engineered. They move with purpose. Almost like they know where to go. They're building something inside this creature. Look at this pattern. See how the signal spreads through the nervous system. It's rewriting it. Rewriting it for what?" Mark asked. "I do not know," Paul admitted. "But whoever designed this was advanced. This is far beyond standard biotech. If this cub grows up like this, it could be different, stronger, smarter." Before Mark could respond, the outpost's alarm sounded. A small transport ship had docked without clearance. Paul glanced at the monitor. "That's odd. No ID code again." Mark felt his old soldier's caution rise. He grabbed his gear and covered Nova with a thermal blanket. "Hide us," Mark whispered to Paul. 3 men entered the outpost. They wore simple clothes but moved with the discipline of trained fighters. One of them spoke with a calm voice. "We're looking for a man traveling with an animal. Rare species. Our employer wants to make sure it's safe." Paul shook his head. "No travelers here. Just me and my work." The men did not believe him. They spread through the room, scanning with handheld devices. Mark stayed low behind the service panel, Nova pressed close to his chest. The cub was completely silent, its heartbeat steady as a drum. When one of the men stepped near the panel, something strange happened. The lights in the room flickered. The man froze, clutching his scanner as if it shocked him. A sharp static charge ran through the air, and the outpost security door slammed shut on its own. Mark felt the cub grow tense in his arms, as if it was somehow connected to what just happened. The men backed away, confused. Something's wrong with the power, one of them muttered. Their leader narrowed his eyes but finally signaled retreat. They left without saying another word. Seconds later, their ship undocked and vanished into space. Paul turned to Mark with wide eyes. What did you just do? It wasn't me, Mark said. It was Nova. The cub blinked up at him with calm amber eyes, then rested its head against his arm. Paul shook his head slowly. Mark, you have to get off this station now. Whoever they are, they'll keep coming. And this creature, it's not just surviving those parasites, it's evolving. Mark packed quickly. Paul handed him a data stick with all the scan results. Take this, it might help you understand what's happening. As Mark boarded his ship again, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on him. This cub was not only rare, it was valuable in ways he did not yet understand. The parasites were not killing Nova. They were turning it into something new, something powerful. And powerful things always attracted dangerous people. Once in space, Mark plotted a random course to shake any trackers. He sat in the cockpit, watching stars slide past, and spoke aloud without meaning to. What are they trying to make you into? Nova looked up at him and gave a low sound that almost resembled speech. The sound was not a growl or a cry, but something deliberate, like a signal. Mark felt a chill. The cub was learning, fast. That night, Mark could not sleep. He kept thinking about the strangers who wanted Nova. They were too well equipped to be hunters or traders. They were organized, maybe even working for a government or a powerful corporation. Why would anyone want an infected cub, unless the infection was not a sickness at all, but a weapon? Mark looked out the viewport. The stars stretched endlessly before him. He knew he had to keep moving. Find a place where he could think. Maybe find someone who could help him understand what Nova truly was. But more than that, he knew one thing for sure. He would never hand Nova over to anyone. Not now, not ever. The cub curled up beside him in the small cabin, glowing faintly in the dim light of the ship. Mark placed a hand gently on its fur. We're in this together, he whispered. Whatever you are becoming, we'll face it side by side. Far away, in the black void, a silent vessel tracked his path. Its engines cold and its weapons armed. Mark had no idea they were already waiting ahead. Mark guided Iron Wind through empty trade routes, keeping the ship on a course that changed every few hours. His instincts told him the men who appeared at Paul's station would not give up easily. When a shadow followed you in war, it usually stayed until someone was gone. Nova rested inside the small cabin, but the cub no longer looked weak. Its golden fur shone brighter, and its eyes followed every sound. Mark noticed how its ears twitched seconds before the ship's sensors picked up anything unusual. He trusted his equipment, but now he trusted Nova more. 3 days into the flight, trouble came. Mark picked up faint energy readings behind him, a vessel running dark, following without any broadcast signal. No friendly freighter traveled. Like that, whoever it was, they were hiding. Mark switched off his main lights and ran silent. He eased Iron Wind toward a belt of scattered asteroids. Moving slowly, he wove between rocks. Using their mass to block any scanning beams, Nova crouched on the deck, tail low, as if it knew they were being hunted. Hours passed in tense silence. Mark had learned patience during his years in uniform. He stayed calm, breathing slow, eyes never leaving the radar. But then the readings grew stronger. Whoever was out there was closing in. Mark adjusted course again, but the shadow ship matched him. He tapped the controls to divert power to engines. The old freighter groaned but responded, gliding faster between the rocks. Suddenly, a beam of light flashed across the cockpit window. A scout drone, fast and silent, zipped past the hull and turned back toward the enemy ship. They have eyes on us, Mark muttered before he could fire up the weapons system. Nova leapt onto the control panel. The cub pressed one paw against a glowing pad. Mark was about to push it away when the entire console lit up. Power readings surged across every screen, and the ship's engines roared louder without Mark touching anything. "I didn't tell you to do that," Mark said, gripping the controls. The ship shot forward at speeds the old engines were never meant to reach. Mark wrestled with the yoke, steering hard to avoid slamming into an asteroid. The freighter darted and swerved as if someone else was guiding it. Mark realized Nova was not only boosting power, it was adjusting flight paths by pulsing signals into the ship's systems. Behind them, the shadow vessel fired a magnetic net. Blue threads of energy spread across space, trying to snare them. Mark jerked the controls, but the ship rolled on its own, slipping through the gap with less than a meter to spare. "Fine," Mark said through clenched teeth. "You fly. I'll cover." He powered up the rear cannons and fired a volley of warning shots. The blast smashed into an asteroid, sending debris spinning toward the enemy. The pursuers broke formation for a moment, giving Iron Wind a chance to dive deeper into the field. Hours later, Mark finally lost them. He powered down and let the freighter drift behind a massive rock. The chase had drained the ship's fuel reserves, and the hull temperature was climbing from overwork. He glanced at Nova, who now sat calmly on the control panel as if nothing had happened. "You're full of surprises," Mark said. The cub tilted its head, eyes glowing faintly, as though pleased with itself. When the danger passed, Mark used the quiet to study Nova further. The cub's pulse was stronger than ever. Mark's portable scanner showed that the parasites inside it were no longer spreading at random. They were moving in organized lines, like engineers building something within Nova's body. Whatever they were creating was reaching completion. Mark knew he needed information fast. He plotted a course toward an old military contact named Samir, who operated a supply depot on a remote moon. Samir owed Mark his life from the war. If anyone could give him shelter and answers, it was him. The next day, Mark tried to sleep, but a sudden jolt shook him awake. The freighter's warning system blared. Another ship was closing from ahead. It was not the same vessel as before, but it had the same dark signature. No ID broadcast. Running with weapons hot, they had set a trap. Mark strapped into the pilot's seat, ready to change course. Nova growled low, for rising, as if it sensed danger. Even before the alarm, the cub placed both paws on the control panel again. This time the ship reacted faster. Power diverted to shields, and the engine shifted to maximum thrust without delay. A sharp voice crackled over the open channel. "Traveler, surrender the specimen, power down your ship or be disabled." Mark ignored the order and rolled the freighter hard left. Energy bolts streaked past, missing by meters. He fired back with the cannons, not to destroy but to keep the enemy busy. The cub gave off a sharp pulse of sound, almost like static, and the lights inside Iron Wind dimmed for a moment. Then something strange happened. The pursuing ship's weapons flickered and went offline for several seconds. Mark seized the chance, diving below the enemy and slipping past at top speed. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," Mark said to Nova. The cub growled softly, still pressing its paws into the console. Mark knew they could not keep this up forever. The old freighter was sturdy but slow, and sooner or later, these hunters would bring more ships. But every time Nova reacted, every time it pulsed strange energy into the systems, Mark realized something important. This cub was not just surviving, it was becoming dangerous. And it had chosen him. Hours later, after shaking pursuit again, Mark set Iron Wind on a long course through an uncharted sector to reach Samir's moon. He sat back in the pilot chair, watching Nova pace the floor. "You knew they were coming, didn't you?" Mark said. The cub stopped and stared at him, tail flicking once, then twice, in perfect rhythm. It was no random movement. It looked like a signal. Mark smiled faintly, though he pressed against his chest. "All right, you watch our back. I'll handle the front." As the freighter glided through the dark, Mark thought about the message Captain Rowan left. Others will come. For it, trust no one. He now understood how true that warning was. Out beyond the edge of Terran space, the hunters were regrouping. Their leaders studied the data from the failed chase. Puzzled by how an old freighter had outrun their fastest ship, they came to one conclusion: the Cub was already changing, and the soldier protecting it had to be stopped before humanity learned its true value. Mark knew none of this yet. He only knew he was being hunted. And if they wanted Nova badly enough to risk everything, then Nova must be worth more than either of them yet understood. Mark reached Samir's remote moon 2 days later. The landing pad was carved into black stone cliffs. Hidden from ordinary flight paths, only old soldiers or trusted traders came here. Samir stood waiting as the iron wind settled on the platform, his broad frame wrapped in a worn jacket. "You always bring trouble, Mark," Samir said with a dry smile. "Only when trouble follows me," Mark replied. Stepping down the ramp with Nova tucked carefully in his arms, Samir's eyes widened. "What is that?" "Not a pet," Mark said. "I need fuel, shelter, and a quiet place to think." "Can you do that?" Samir nodded and sighed. Quickly, the supply depot was small but secure. Heavy doors sealed behind them, and scanners swept the area. Mark explained in simple words what had happened: the strange inheritance, the parasites, the men hunting him. Samir listened without interrupting, then crouched to study Nova. The cub sniffed Samir's hand but did not growl. "This creature is watching everything," Samir said softly. "Look at those eyes. It is judging me." Mark gave a short nod. "It's been doing that since the day I opened the case." Samir led them to an old workshop with medical tools left over from the war. "I can run more scans than your portable device," Samir said. "But if these hunters find you here, I will have to fight. Are you ready for that?" "I did not come here to hide," Mark said. "I came here to understand what this cub really is." The scans took several hours. Nova remained calm, watching the machines with curious eyes. When the results appeared on the screen, Samir frowned. "These parasites are not killing it," he said. "They are working together, repairing and improving every part of its body. Its bones are thicker, its muscles are denser, and its brain activity is far beyond any normal animal. It is evolving while we speak." "Into what?" Mark asked. Samir shook his head. "I have never seen anything like this. Whoever designed these parasites wanted a predator that could learn faster than any human and survive any wound. And this is just a cub. When it matures, I cannot imagine its strength." Nova suddenly jumped down from the table and padded toward Mark. It looked straight into his eyes and gave a soft sound, almost like a call. Mark crouched beside it. "What is it?" The cub placed its paw on his hand and stayed there. For a brief moment, Mark felt a strange pulse, like a wave of energy passing through his skin. It was not painful, only warm and steady. Samir watched in silence. "It knows you," Samir said slowly. "More than that, it is linking with you." That night, Mark stayed awake while Samir prepared supplies. Nova curled at Mark's feet. The cub's breathing matched his own, as if it had learned his rhythm every time Mark moved. Nova raised its head and watched the doors. Just before dawn, alarms echoed through the depot. Samir burst into the workshop. Unmarked ships dropping out of orbit, he said. 3 of them. Armed, Mark grabbed his gear and lifted Nova into his arms. "Get to the ship," he said. Samir pointed to a narrow tunnel leading to the landing pad. "Go through there. I will hold them off." "Samir," Mark said firmly, "you come with me." Samir shook his head. "If I leave, they will follow us. I will buy you time." "Go." Mark hesitated, but years of service had taught him when to move without argument. He ran through the tunnel as heavy doors sealed behind him. By the time he reached Iron Wind, enemy troops were already landing on the cliffs. The engines roared to life. As the freighter lifted, energy bolts struck the platform. Samir's defense guns fired back, forcing the attackers to take cover. Mark pushed the throttle, and the old ship climbed into the upper atmosphere. Nova leapt onto the control panel again. The cub pressed both paws on the glowing pad, and power surged through the freighter just as enemy fighters appeared on the radar. "All right, Nova," Mark muttered. Let's see what you can really do." The enemy ships opened fire. Iron Wind rolled sharply without Mark touching the controls. The Cub guided the freighter like it had flown ships all its life. Missiles streaked past but never found their mark. Mark worked the guns, sending bursts of fire to keep the attackers at a distance. Then Nova did something entirely new. It released a short, piercing sound, not loud, but sharp like a pulse. Every console light in Iron Wind dimmed, then returned brighter. A second later, the enemy fighters jerked off course. Their engines sputtered, and their weapons went silent for several seconds. Mark seized the moment, diving the freighter through a narrow canyon of rock that led straight out of the moon's atmosphere. When they emerged into open space, the pursuing ships were still struggling to recover power. Mark hit maximum thrust and sped into deep space. Hours later, when the chase had ended, Mark leaned back in his seat. Nova sat calmly, tail curled around its paws, as if nothing unusual had happened. "You are not just a cub," Mark said softly. "You are something else entirely." The bond between them was no longer in doubt. Nova reacted before danger appeared, flew the ship without training, and even disrupted enemy weapons. More than that, it trusted Mark completely, staying close as if they were one team. Mark set a new course, far away from any colony or trade lane. He needed time to think. If the parasites inside Nova were creating a living weapon, he had to know why his cousin Rowan had sent it to him. What secret was hidden inside this creature that powerful people were willing to kill for? Before Mark could find answers, he had to keep Nova alive, and to do that, he would have to become a soldier again, not for any army, but for a single, small life that had chosen him. As Iron Wind disappeared into the dark, Nova climbed onto Mark's shoulder and rested its head there. The Cub's steady heartbeat matched the thrum of the engines. And for the first time since this began, Mark felt a quiet certainty. They were no longer just running. They were learning how to fight back. Mark and Nova drifted through deep space, leaving Samir's moon far behind. The Cub had settled into a quiet rhythm beside him, but Mark's mind raced. He could not stop thinking about the parasites inside Nova. They were not simply harmful. They were building something powerful, and the hunters chasing them had known this. Mark decided he needed answers, even if it meant going to risky places. The only option was a research station hidden in a neutral sector, far from Terran authority, run by an exobiologist named Dr. Lena Havel. She had studied alien life forms for decades and was known for taking on creatures no one else would touch. The journey to the station was long, but it gave Mark time to observe Nova closely. The Cub's movements had grown sharper, more precise. When Mark adjusted the ship's course to avoid a rogue asteroid cluster, Nova would lean forward, eyes glowing faintly, as if guiding the ship. Even without touching the controls, it had begun influencing the freighter's systems through the energy it emitted. Nova also seemed aware of Mark's moods when he tensed at the thought of the hunters. The Cub would nuzzle his arm, calming him with its warmth. Mark found himself talking to it aloud. "I don't know what they did to you, little one, but I promise I'll figure it out." Nova blinked slowly, and for a moment, Mark thought it understood every word. Finally, they reached the station. It hovered quietly in the void, a large, silver structure with solar rays stretching in every direction. Docking was simple, thanks to the Cub's guidance, and Mark carefully carried Nova inside. Dr. Lena Havel greeted him, a tall woman with short, silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes. "I hear you have something unusual," she said. Mark nodded. "This Cub is not normal. It's infected, but it's not dying. If anything, it's changing." He handed her the data sticks from Samir's scans. "I need to know what these parasites are doing." Dr. Havel examined Nova carefully. She ran advanced scans, observing the parasites' movement in real time. Her face grew serious. "These parasites are engineered," she said slowly. "They are not random organisms. They are programmed to interact with the Cub's DNA and nervous system. Look here. They are building neural connections far beyond a normal predator's brain. It is learning faster than any species I have ever studied." Mark frowned. Learning for what? Dr. Havel shook her head. That I cannot say. But these parasites have one purpose, to turn this cub into a weapon. Its instincts are enhanced. Its reflexes accelerated. Its body optimized for survival. In combat, whoever created them wanted control over a creature that could think, fight, and survive like nothing else in the galaxy. Mark clenched his fists. And the people hunting us, they want to control it. Yes, Dr. Havel said. But the cub is not just a weapon. It is aware of you, of your presence. It is bonding. That bond is strong enough that the cub will resist outside control. You are part of the design now. Whoever engineered this could not predict that a human would influence it so deeply. Nova stepped forward, touching Mark's hand with its paw. Its eyes glowed brighter. Mark felt a pulse through his body, steady and warm, almost like the cub was communicating directly. I see it, Dr. Havel said, voice soft. It trusts you. It is choosing you as its partner, its guide. That makes it unpredictable to its creators. Suddenly, alarms blared across the station. Red lights flashed, warning of an incoming vessel. Mark and Dr. Havel rushed to the control room. On the monitor, 3 shadowy ships approached, weapons glowing. The hunters had tracked them even this far. Mark glanced at Nova. The cub crouched. Low, ears back, tail flicking. We cannot run forever, Mark said. We have to fight smart. Dr. Havel nodded. The station has defenses, but you will need to act quickly. They prepared as the first enemy fighter dropped out of stealth. Mark gripped his rifle while Nova leapt onto the console. Paws pressing glowing panels. Power surged through the station shields. Energy rerouted to turrets. The fighters fired. Bolts slammed into the outer hull, shaking the station. But Nova's pulses interfered with their targeting systems. Missiles veered off course. Engines sputtered, and the enemy ships struggled to maintain control. Mark fired his rifle from behind. A bulkhead, hitting drones that tried to breach the station's airlocks. Dr. Havel guided him through the controls, helping him aim the defenses. The cub's energy pulses kept the enemy off balance. It was as if the parasites had given Nova the ability to manipulate technology, turning instinct into control over machines. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the hunters retreated, engines smoking. Mark exhaled deeply, staring at Nova. The cub sat calmly, tail wrapped neatly around its paws, amber eyes bright with energy. You're more than I imagined, Mark said softly. Nova pressed its head against his chest. The bond between them had grown stronger through the fight. Dr. Havel studied the readings. Mark, this is not just a predator. This is a living weapon designed for war. But it has the intelligence to make choices. And it has chosen you. Mark felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. He realized that this cub was not just a challenge. It was the key to something greater. The parasites inside Nova had been intended as tools of control. But the cub's bond with him had turned them into something different, a living protector. Over the next hours, Mark and Dr. Havel analyzed every detail of the cub's system. They discovered that the parasites were creating networks connecting muscles, nerves, and the brain. They had even begun integrating some external signals, energy fields, mechanical vibrations. And even Mark's own presence, Nova could sense. Danger, anticipate moves, and now even influence machines. Mark leaned back, exhausted. This is bigger than I thought. They wanted a weapon. Instead, they created a partner who chooses humans. Dr. Havel smiled faintly. And that is the human answer. Even the most advanced designs cannot predict trust, loyalty, or choice. You gave Nova something its creators could not. Nova climbed onto Mark's shoulder and licked his cheek softly. Its eyes glowed warmly. Mark laughed quietly. All right, little one. You and I are going to figure this out together. As the freighter docked at the station's supply bay to prepare for the next stage, Mark realized they were no longer hiding. The hunters would keep coming, but now they had a plan. Nova had grown stronger, smarter, and fully bonded to him. And Mark knew one truth. No force in the galaxy could take the cub from him without facing something it had never faced before. A human who would fight for a life that was now part of him. Mark and Nova left the research station at dawn. The cub had grown more alert, muscles taut. Eyes bright with intelligence, the hunters would not give up, and Mark knew it. But this time, he was not running. He had learned how Nova could influence systems, anticipate danger, and react faster than any human. It was time to turn the chase around. Mark plotted a course toward a narrow nebula field, one that only a skilled pilot could navigate. Enemy ships could follow, but their movements would be limited by the dense gas clouds and magnetic storms. The nebula would be the perfect trap. Ready, Nova? Mark asked. The cub crouched low on the console, tail flicking. Amber eyes focused sharply on him. The bond between them had strengthened. They moved as a team, understanding each other without words. As they entered the nebula, Mark reduced the lights to minimum and let the freighter drift slowly. Nova pressed its paws on the control panels, and the ship's sensors amplified, detecting obstacles and hidden channels in the gas clouds. Mark guided the ship through tight twists, dodging massive gas pockets and floating debris. Minutes later, a warning appeared on the monitor. 3 ships had followed them into the nebula. The enemy was closing in. Mark's heart pounded. Here they come, he said. Nova growled low. It's for bristling. Mark switched the freighter to full defensive mode. Energy shields glowed, and turret systems activated. The hunters fired first. Bolts of energy struck the outer hull, but Nova's pulses interfered with their targeting. The beams missed, skimming past the ship as Mark weaved through a narrow canyon of gas and rock. Suddenly, one of the enemy ships tried to flank them from above. Nova leapt onto the control panel, pressing paws against glowing pads. A wave of energy surged through the freighter's systems. The sensors blinked and then locked onto the enemy ship's engines. Bolts of energy from the enemy misfired, hitting the gas clouds instead and creating thick, electrified smoke. Mark laughed quietly. Nice work, little one. Keep it up. The enemy ships regrouped, but Mark had already planned the next move. He dove Iron Wind into a series of twisting tunnels in the nebula where the hunters could barely maneuver. Nova guided the ship, anticipating turns before they appeared. Mark adjusted the weapons, firing bursts that damaged the enemy's shields without destroying them. His goal was to slow them, not to kill. Hours passed in tense battle. The freighters' shields held. Nova reacted instantly to every threat, and Mark learned to trust the cub completely. Every time an enemy ship tried to target him, Nova pulsed a wave of energy that disrupted their controls. The hunters were skilled, but they had never faced a predator bonded with a human in this way. Finally, the lead hunter's ship collided with a gas pocket, throwing it off balance. The second tried to retreat, but Mark anticipated the move. He fired a series of coordinated pulses, assisted by Nova, that trapped the ship in the nebula's magnetic currents. It spun uncontrollably, forcing the pilot to surrender. Mark kept the freighter steady as Nova continued to control the systems. The cub's energy pulses had become stronger, almost like a natural weapon now. The last hunter hovered in place, unsure whether to continue the fight. Mark leaned forward, rifle ready but calm. Leave now, he said firmly. You will not win. The enemy ship hesitated and then retreated into the nebula's shadows. The freighter floated quietly, engines humming as Nova hopped down and curled beside Mark. The cub's amber eyes glowed softly, a sign of calm after the storm. Mark exhaled deeply, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time, they had not only survived but gained the advantage. Nova had grown from a dependent cub into a creature that could protect itself and its human companion. Over the next few hours, Mark examined the freighter's systems. Nova's influence was extraordinary. It had altered the ship's power flow, strengthened shields, and even improved engine performance without Mark touching a single control. The cub's bond with him was more than instinct. It was integration. They could anticipate each other's actions in perfect harmony. Mark smiled faintly. You are amazing, he whispered to Nova. The cub nudged his hand, responding with a soft purr-like sound. He knew the battle was not over. The hunters would return, likely with larger forces. But now Mark had a plan. They would not wait to be chased. They would strike first, using Nova's abilities and his own skills to stay ahead. The galaxy would learn that humans and predators could fight as one. Over the next few days, Mark trained with Nova and the freighter. He practiced evasive maneuvers while the Cub assisted, guiding the ship through asteroid fields and magnetic storms. Nova learned new patterns quickly, growing stronger and faster each day. Mark tested combat simulations, and each time, Nova reacted with precision that no human pilot could match. One evening, as the freighter drifted near a small, uncharted moon, Mark set up a holomap. He studied enemy routes, predicting where the hunters would strike next. Nova climbed onto the console, watching the data flicker across the screens. It tapped a paw on a specific location, and Mark realized the Cub had chosen a target for interception. "You want to lead them into a trap?" Mark asked quietly. Nova blinked and leaned forward, pressing its paw against the holomap. Mark nodded, understanding the strategy. The Cub was not just reacting anymore. It was planning, coordinating, and deciding the best course of action. When the hunters returned, they found themselves drawn into a carefully laid ambush. Mark piloted the freighter through narrow channels while Nova disrupted enemy systems, disabling engines and targeting arrays. The hunters' ships struggled to respond, and one by one, they were forced to retreat or surrender. By the end of the engagement, Mark and Nova had turned the tide completely. The hunters would think twice before chasing a human bonded with such a creature again, and Mark knew this was only the beginning. Sitting in the quiet of the freighter cabin, Nova curled at his feet. Its breathing was steady, its eyes calm. Mark looked down at the Cub, feeling the strength of their bond. "We've done well," he said, "but there's more ahead. We'll have to keep going, keep learning, and stay ready." Nova lifted its head and pressed against his hand, amber eyes glowing softly. Mark smiled. Together, they were no longer just running. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with, a human and a predator bonded against any threat the galaxy could throw at them. Mark knew that one day the hunters would return, but with Nova at his side, he was no longer afraid. They would face the future together, stronger, smarter, and ready for whatever came next. Mark and Nova drifted through the outer rim, watching the dark void ahead. They had survived countless encounters, but now they knew the hunters would come with everything they had. Mark had no illusions. This final confrontation would determine the Cubs' future and their own survival. Nova sat beside him on the control panel, amber eyes scanning every sensor reading. The Cub's muscles were tense, tail flicking in rhythm with the ship's hum. Mark had grown to trust Nova's instincts completely. Every time danger appeared, the Cub anticipated it. Now, he understood that Nova was more than a companion. It was an extension of himself. "Ready?" Mark asked softly. Nova leaned into his arm and pressed a paw against the console. The freighter pulsed with energy, shields, and engines responding. Instantly to Nova's guidance, the enemy appeared as expected. 5 large ships, armed and moving with precision, dropped out of stealth ahead. They spread out in a semicircle, trying to trap the freighter. Mark adjusted the course slightly, weaving the ship into a narrow asteroid belt. Nova's paws guided every movement, predicting turns before they happened. The hunters fired first. Energy bolts slammed against the hull, shaking the freighter. Mark returned fire with the rear turrets, while Nova pulsed energy into the ship's systems. Shields flickered and strengthened, engines surged, and the freighter moved with unnatural agility. The hunters' weapons misfired repeatedly, the pulses from Nova disrupting their targeting arrays. Mark realized they had an advantage no one expected. Nova could not only anticipate threats, but also influence technology. This was a predator bonded to a human, creating a new kind of power, a combination of instinct and human strategy. He planned their attack. "Nova, we lead them in," he whispered. The Cub responded with a low growl. Pressing its paws against the console, the freighter surged forward, diving into the asteroid belt at full speed. The enemy followed, but the asteroids made navigation difficult. Mark guided the freighter through narrow gaps while Nova adjusted energy flows, pushing shields to the maximum and rerouting power to engines. One of the enemy ships collided with a massive rock. its hull cracking under the impact. Another ship's weapons malfunctioned after repeated interference from Nova's pulses. Mark realized the hunters had underestimated the bond between a human and a predator. They expected fear, they expected weakness, but they had never faced a team that moved as one. Now, Mark said, he activated the freighter's rear pulse cannons, firing bursts at the remaining ships. Nova assisted, directing power to the targeting systems. The blast struck with precision, disabling engines and forcing enemy ships to surrender. The last ship tried to retreat, but Nova pulsed again. Its energy disrupted the ship's controls, and it drifted helplessly into the asteroid field. Mark let out a long breath. The freighter floated silently in the void. Nova jumped onto his shoulder, nuzzling him gently. "We did it," he said quietly. The cub purred, amber eyes glowing softly. Dr. Lena Havel's voice came over the communication system. "Mark, I've been monitoring. I see what you did. That cub, it's extraordinary. But more than that, so are you. You've proven something important. The hunters expected a weapon to control. Instead, they faced a human bond they could not break." Mark smiled faintly. "The cub chose me, Lena. I didn't choose it. But together, we became stronger than any weapon." Dr. Havel nodded. "That is the human answer. Trust, loyalty, choice, things no machine or parasite can replicate. You've created a new kind of power. One they cannot predict, one they cannot control." Mark turned to Nova, feeling the weight of their journey. "You and I, we survived because we trusted each other. We will keep surviving, and no one will take you from me." Nova pressed its head against his chest, calm and warm. The cub's energy pulses had returned to a steady glow, no longer reactive but focused. It had grown into the creature its parasites were meant to create, but with a heart and mind of its own. Shaped by human companionship, Mark plotted a course to the outer rim where they could recover and prepare for whatever came next. He knew the galaxy would watch this cub, that others would eventually seek it again. But he also knew this, the hunters had learned, that humans could fight back in ways they never imagined, and a human with a predator bonded to them was a force no one could control. As the iron wing glided through the stars, Mark reflected on the journey. He had started as a soldier, carrying out orders and surviving battles. Now, he was something more, a guardian, a partner, a human who had earned the trust of a creature engineered for war. The bond between them was more powerful than any weapon the hunters had. It was proof that humanity's strength was not in machines or brute force, but in courage, trust, and connection. Nova leapt onto the console and tapped a glowing pad, guiding the ship through a hidden wormhole. Mark watched as stars stretched into lines, and then they emerged in open space near a neutral sector. No one knew they had arrived, and for now, they were safe. "Rest," Mark said. "We've earned it." Nova curled at his feet, tail wrapped around itself, breathing steady. Mark leaned back in the pilot chair, feeling the calm after a storm. In that quiet moment, he understood something important. The cub was not just a weapon. It was a living proof of humanity's ingenuity, resilience, and heart. The parasites had tried to turn it into something controllable, but Mark and Nova had rewritten the plan. Together, they had turned fear into strength, danger into survival, and an engineered predator into a loyal companion. Mark's eyes softened as he looked at Nova. "We did it, little one. Together, we are unstoppable." The stars stretched endlessly around them, but Mark felt no fear. He had a companion who trusted him completely, a creature who had grown beyond its design, and a bond that no enemy could ever break. In the galaxy's vast darkness, they were no longer just survivors. They were a team, a force that proved humanity's answer was more than strategy or weapons. It was heart, loyalty, and the courage to face the unknown. Mark reached forward, gently stroking Nova's golden fur. The cub looked up, eyes bright and warm. Together, they watched the stars pass, ready for whatever adventures the galaxy would bring next. In that moment, Mark knew the truth. Humanity's greatest strength was the bond between individuals, the courage to protect those who cannot defend themselves. and the wisdom to turn even the most dangerous threats into allies. And with Nova at his side, there was nothing in the universe they could not face.